He laughed when he said it. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the words themselves, though the words were cruel enough, but the laugh. 41 years, and I had never heard him laugh like that. Like I was a minor inconvenience he was finally done tolerating. "You'll sign whatever I put in front of you," my husband said, "or you'll never see those grandchildren again." I was 67 years old. I was standing in the kitchen of the home we had built together in Oakville, Ontario. And I had no idea in that moment how much he had already taken from me. I need to go back. Not far, not to the beginning, not to when we were young and I believed in things the way you only believe in things when you haven't been worn down yet. Just to about 2 years before that kitchen. That's where this really starts. My husband's name was Gerald. We met in our mid-20s at a company picnic outside Hamilton. He worked in commercial real estate and I was a school administrator. We married young enough that I still thought love was simple, and we built a life in the way most people build lives, slowly, imperfectly, with more compromise than either of us probably admitted at the time. We had 2 children. Our daughter, the elder of the 2, settled in Winnipeg with her family. Our son stayed closer, in Mississauga with his wife and their 3 boys, our grandchildren, who I would take to Kelso on weekends when the weather allowed, and who used to fall asleep in the back of my car, smelling like sunscreen and lake water. Gerald retired at 63. I retired at 65. And for a while things were fine. Not extraordinary, but fine. We traveled a little. I joined a book club. He played golf. We did what retired couples in Ontario do. Then, in the 3rd year of our retirement, something shifted. I noticed it first in small things. Gerald started taking calls in his office with the door closed. He began handling all the mail himself, which he had never done before. When I mentioned our investment accounts at dinner one evening, we had managed them jointly for over 30 years. He said he was restructuring things and that I shouldn't worry about it. I should have worried about it. I didn't because I had trusted him for 4 decades. I didn't because I had no reason to really believe in the way that changes everything, that the man I had built my life with was quietly and methodically dismantling it. 6 months later, he handed me a document across the kitchen table and told me he wanted a divorce. I stared at the paper for a long time. Divorce. The word sat there like something foreign, something that happened to other people. "You can keep the car," he said. He had already moved on to the practical, the way you do when you've been planning something for a while, and the announcement is just a formality. "I've made arrangements for the house." The house, our house, a property in Oakville that we had purchased in 1998 for what felt like a fortune at the time, and which had appreciated over the years into something worth considerably more when I finally had it appraised weeks later. After things had already begun to fall apart, it came back at just under $2,400,000. "What arrangements?" I said. He told me he had transferred ownership of the house into a numbered company, a corporation, 18 months ago, that it was, legally, no longer marital property, that his lawyer had reviewed it, that there was very little I could do. He said it the way you might explain a parking ticket, calm, prepared, like he had rehearsed it. What I didn't know then, what I would spend the next 8 months learning, was how much more he had moved. Not just the house. The investment portfolio we had built together since the 1990s. A rental property in Guelph we had purchased as a retirement income stream. Money I had contributed to, worked for, organized tax documents around, signed my name to for the better part of my adult life. All of it quietly shifted. All of it carefully restructured. I called my daughter that night. She listened. She cried a little. She said she was coming down on the weekend. I called my son the next morning. He said he already knew. That was the moment. Not Gerald across the kitchen table, not the document, not even the laugh. That phone call with my son was the moment I understood what kind of thing this actually was. He had known for months. Gerald had told him. Had, apparently, framed it in a way that made sense to my son. That the marriage had run its course, that Gerald had made provisions, that my son shouldn't interfere. And my son had chosen, in whatever quiet calculation he made, to stay out of it, to accept what his father told him, to say nothing to me. When I asked him how he could have kept this from me, he said, "Mum, I didn't want to be in the middle of it." He was already in the middle of it. He had just chosen which side. What followed was a particular kind of grief that I don't think has a proper name. It isn't the same as losing someone. It's more like discovering that something you believed was solid, something you built your entire sense of safety on, was always a little hollow. The marriage, the family, the assumption that the people who are supposed to love you are, at minimum, honest with you. I hired a lawyer. The first one came from a general family law practice in Burlington, a man who was pleasant and thorough and who told me, with genuine sympathy, that the case was complicated, that the timing of the corporate transfer might matter, that it depended on when exactly Gerald had made the decision to divorce versus when he had moved the assets, that these things were difficult to prove. He used the word difficult 4 times in our first meeting. I left that office knowing I needed someone different. My daughter, who had driven down from Winnipeg and was sleeping in the guest room and making me eat properly, which I would not have done on my own, found the name of a firm in Toronto that specialized in high-asset family law and specifically in cases involving financial misconduct during marriage. The firm was called Marchetti and Huang. She made the appointment herself, because she knew I was close to the edge and might talk myself out of going. We drove up together on a Tuesday in November. The 401 was gray and slow. We didn't talk much. I remember looking out at the lake as we came around the curve near the Clarkson exit and thinking that I had driven this road probably 1,000 times, and it had always just been the road home. The lawyer who met with us was a woman, maybe 40, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a directness I found steadying. I told her the story from the beginning. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me 2 questions. The first, did I have access to any financial records from before the transfer, tax returns, joint account statements, investment documents? I did. I had decades of them, organized in a filing cabinet in the study. Gerald had never asked me to get rid of them, possibly because it hadn't occurred to him that I would fight back. The second question, had I ever been added to the numbered company as a director or shareholder, even briefly, even on paper? I didn't know. I told her I didn't know. She nodded slowly. That's actually useful information, she said. If you were never included and the transfer happened during the marriage, there are arguments to be made under the Family Law Act about equalization of net family property. The question is timing. We need to establish when he decided to divorce versus when he moved the assets. If the transfer was premeditated, if he was planning to leave you while legally restructuring marital property, that changes things considerably. I asked her directly, was there anything to do, or was I just going through motions? She looked at me for a moment. There's something to do, she said. It won't be easy, and I won't promise you an outcome, but there's something to do. We left the office and sat in the car in the parking garage on Adelaide, and my daughter held my hand, and neither of us said anything for a while. Then she said, "You going to fight him?" It wasn't a question. I said yes. What followed over the next several months was the hardest sustained effort I have made as an adult. And I say that as a woman who raised 2 children, managed a school of 400 students for 11 years, and once got through a Canadian winter with a broken furnace because the repair company had a 3-week backlog. The legal process moved in the way legal processes move, not quickly and not gently. Marchetti and Huang filed a motion challenging the validity of the asset transfer on the grounds that it had been executed in contemplation of divorce, a specific legal concept under Ontario family law, and that it constituted an attempt to defeat my equalization claim. Gerald hired a firm in Toronto as well. His lawyers were aggressive. They argued the corporation had been established for legitimate tax planning purposes unrelated to the marriage breakdown. They produced documents. We produced documents. Our side requested financial disclosure. His side delayed financial disclosure. We went back to court on the disclosure issue. This happened more than once. Through all of this, my son remained on the other side of what had become a clearly drawn line. He called me once in January, about 3 months into the legal process. He said he was worried about the family. He said this was escalating. He asked me if there was a way to reach a settlement without going further. I asked him where he had been when his father was transferring our joint assets into a corporation without telling me. He didn't have an answer for that. I told him I loved him. I told him I hoped, when this was over, that we could find a way back to each other. And I told him I was not going to stop. My daughter had come back twice more by then. She had also started calling a woman named Louise, a friend of mine from my teaching years who lived in Kitchener, who had been through her own divorce in her 50s, and who turned out to be one of the most practically useful people I had in my corner during that time. Louise showed up with casseroles and credit card statements I had forgotten I'd kept, and a particular blunt energy that cut through the fog when I needed it most. In February, Marchetti and Huang received the full financial disclosure we had been waiting for. I sat in the office on a Thursday afternoon and went through it with my lawyer page by page. What Gerald had done was methodical. Beginning approximately 26 months before he handed me those divorce papers, he had taken a series of steps. The house had gone into a numbered company. The rental property in Guelph had been transferred to that same company. A portion of our joint, non-registered investment account, a significant portion, over $400,000, had been moved in increments small enough not to trigger obvious flags into accounts held solely in his name and subsequently into the company. The timing was what mattered. He was planning this, my lawyer said. It wasn't a question either. The emails came up in discovery. That was the part nobody expected. Least of all Gerald, I think. His own financial records contain correspondence with his accountant that began, we established, 31 months before he filed for divorce. In those emails, he discussed restructuring in anticipation of a change in personal circumstances. He asked about protecting assets. He asked specifically about numbered companies. 31 months. Our last family Christmas together before the restructuring began. My son had still been in his 20s. I had cooked a turkey and made butter tarts from scratch because Gerald liked them, and I was still, in those days, a woman who did things like that without thinking about whether they were reciprocated. When those emails surfaced, Gerald's lawyers got quieter. The mediation happened in March in a boardroom in a building near Union Station. Gerald was on one side of the table with his lawyers. I was on the other side with mine. We did not look at each other much. I will tell you what I felt sitting across from him that day, because I think it matters, and because I think people sometimes expect something dramatic when they imagine that kind of moment. What I felt was tired, not defeated, tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time and from finally being close enough to setting it down that you can feel the weight of it differently. Gerald had aged in the months since I had last seen him. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well. The negotiated settlement took most of the day. His position had weakened considerably after the discovery documents. Marchetti and Huang had built a strong case that the transfers were made in contemplation of divorce and therefore subject to equalization. The numbered company did not protect him in the way he had believed it would, or perhaps in the way his first lawyer had told him it would. By late afternoon, we had reached an agreement. I will not detail every figure, because some of it I still find painful, and some of it I still find unbelievable. And I'm not sure the numbers are what the story is really about. What I will say is this. The settlement included my equalization entitlement under the Family Law Act, a share of the corporation's assets, and a lump sum structured to account for the income I had foregone during years when I had reduced my own career advancement to support our household. I walked out of that building at 5:20 on a March afternoon, and the air was cold, and there was still ice along the edges of the sidewalk, and my daughter was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps, hands in her coat pockets, and she looked at my face and she said, "We got it, didn't we?" I said yes. I won't tell you everything got clean after that. Life doesn't work that way, and I've been around long enough to distrust stories that end in clean restorations. My relationship with my son is still, I search for the right word, tentative. He called me in the spring. He apologized in the partial way that people apologize when they know they were wrong, but have not entirely reckoned with how wrong. I accepted what he offered because he is my son and because I understood, even if I didn't excuse it, the position Gerald had put him in. We are speaking. We had dinner twice over the summer. His wife, to her credit, has been warmer to me than he has. His boys still want to go to Kelso. That matters. Gerald and I have not spoken since the mediation. I know from my daughter, who heard from someone in Gerald's circle, that he moved into an apartment in Burlington, that things with the woman he had apparently been involved with. I learned this later through the discovery process when certain financial transfers took on a different meaning, did not continue. I did not find satisfaction in this the way I expected to. I found something more like a flat, colorless recognition, a chapter ending on its own terms. I sold the Oakville house as part of the settlement. I stood in the driveway on the last day after the moving truck had gone, and I looked at it for a long time. The garden we had planted in 2003 along the east side, the driveway crack we had been meaning to repair for 6 years, the upstairs window where the afternoon light came in slanted and warm in September. 41 years is not nothing. Even when it ends this way, it is not nothing. I bought a smaller place in Port Hope, on the north side with a view of the Ganaraska and a backyard just large enough for the things I want to grow. Louise helped me move in on a Saturday in May. My daughter flew in for the weekend and slept on the air mattress in the second bedroom and made eggs in the morning and said, in the way she sometimes does when she's trying not to cry, that it looked like the kind of house where good things would happen. I think she's right. I am 68 years old now. I am not who I was at the beginning of this. I am not, I think, less than who I was. I know things I didn't know before, about the law, about money, about what people are capable of when they've decided they are done with you. I know which people stay. I know what it means to fight for something when you are exhausted and frightened and don't know if it will work. In the corner of the backyard in Port Hope, I planted a serviceberry tree. They're slow to establish, but they're hardy, and in a few years they produce fruit. My grandmother had one. I've wanted one for longer than I can say. I planted it in October, when the ground was still workable, and I pressed the soil down with my hands, and I stayed there for a minute in the afternoon, quiet, and I thought, this is mine. This small piece of ground, this tree that will take years to bear fruit, this life I am still, improbably and gratefully, in the middle of building. This is mine. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the lawyers, though they mattered. not the emails Gerald's accountant kept, though those mattered too. What made the difference was the decision I made in a parking garage on Adelaide Street on a cold Tuesday in November, sitting in the passenger seat with my daughter beside me. When I said yes, I'm going to fight this. That decision didn't come from nowhere. It came from 41 years of showing up when things were hard. It came from 11 years of running a school where I learned that the person in the room who stays calm and keeps asking the right questions usually finds a way forward. It came from understanding, slowly, painfully, that trusting someone does not mean surrendering your judgment to them entirely. I had trusted Gerald. I had trusted him the way you trust the ground under your feet. When that trust turned out to be misplaced, I had to decide whether the betrayal would define what came next, or whether I would. Gerald made his choices. He made them methodically, over 31 months, with a level of planning that still takes my breath away when I think about it too long. And what I've come to understand is that those choices were not just about money. They were about what he believed I was capable of. He believed I would be confused, that I would be overwhelmed, that I would, as he had always expected, defer to him. That was his real miscalculation, not the legal strategy. The assumption about who I was, what I had, what I didn't fully recognize I had until I needed it, was the habit of thinking clearly under pressure. Louise used to say that knowledge is the thing nobody can take from you once you've got it. She's right. I went into that first meeting at Marchetti and Huang not knowing anything about the Family Law Act or equalization claims, or what it means for a transfer to be made in contemplation of divorce. I came out of it understanding enough to ask the right questions. That's all it ever takes. Not expertise, but the willingness to learn what you need to learn, and the honesty to admit what you don't yet know. My son still doesn't fully understand, I think, what his silence cost me in those early months. I've had to sit with that. I've had to find a way to love him without pretending the silence didn't happen. That's its own kind of work. The work of being honest about harm without letting the accounting of it consume you. He chose comfort over integrity when it was hard. I hope, as he gets older, he learns to make a different choice. I hope I'm around to see it. The serviceberry tree is small still. It needs another season before it really establishes. But it's alive, and the roots are holding, and some mornings I stand at the kitchen window in Port Hope with my coffee and look out at it and feel something I don't quite have a word for. Not triumph. Something quieter than that. Something more like continuity. Like the person I was before all of this and the person I am now are still the same person, just with more miles on her. That feels like enough.